Oh, give thanks unto the Lord, for he is good, and his mercy endures forever. It's a beautiful day in the neighborhood, and we thank God for blessing us to see one more day. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on when you watch this broadcast. It's Friday, and I just want to share a very brief uh, message with you today. Um, I said brief, but then as I'm thinking, it may be a little longer than I expected. But I remember when I was a much younger preacher, how excited and honored and thrilled I would feel when an older preacher would give me his books. Just think back and to some of you who are in my age bracket, when an older preacher gave you some of his books, you felt honored. You felt that he thought something of you, that he would give you one of his books because books are valuable, and we don't just give away books. And I was just going through my library, and I came across some manuals and some disciplines from our religious neighbors. And you really have to value when an older preacher gives you those kind of books. And so I'm a baby boomer, and so the older preachers is another generation. So you got to remember what the fight was, what the argument was, and the approach. And I can remember days when in gospel meetings we would read out of those manuals and read out of those disciplines to try to convince and persuade individuals of what the right doctrine was. And I guess those days are behind us, but I just want to share a thought with you since this is a fundamental message and approach, and I want to keep before us some fundamentals of our faith. I'm reading out of one of those disciplines manuals that a preacher gave me years ago, and then I got enough sense to go buy one on my own. But still, it's just humbling when you can look and see the autograph of a preacher, uh, and this was in his library. And so I'm reading from one of our religious neighbors, and you can see I'm trying to be politically correct in this approach. This is the days that we're living in. You have to still tell the truth, but you want to be correct because you want folk to hear you. Excuse me. You don't want folk not to hear you. You want them to hear you. But when it comes to baptism, it said the order for the administration of the sacrament of baptism. Let every adult person and the parents of every child to be baptized have the choice of sprinkling, pouring, or immersion. So that's in their discipline. I remember when I did meetings and we would read out of that, and I heard other preachers, read out of that. So when it comes to baptism in this particular faith, they say that the person being baptized, could choose the mode or the method of baptism. And the three methods that they suggest would be sprinkling, pouring, or immersion. Well, I think that's a Bible subject. That's a Bible issue. There are biblical examples of baptism. And even if we just look at the word baptism, to define it from its Greek definition, it carries the idea of immersion. It carries the idea of being totally immersed. It carries the idea of being covered or being dipped and absorbed with certain types of liquid. It comes from the idea of a cloth being dipped in dye and being dipped to the extent where the cloth would be absorbed by the dye, fully covered by the dye. Um, there was just, we don't read in scripture where when individuals were baptized, they were given the choice. I remember as a youngster watching these movies that come on, uh, Ten Commandments and then Easter movies, and then they had the episode of the Ethiopian eunuch. And then, well, not even as a youngster, as I grew up, and then I watched it. I said, well, they're pretty close. The eunuch is in the chariot. Someone's teaching him. They get to the water. They go down. They go to the water. But when they go to the water, then the individual in the movie scooped his hand in the water and poured it over the candidates' heads. I just think that if we stick with Scripture, if we stay with Scripture, you're going to find that water is necessary for baptism to take place, but there must be enough water for the person to go down and come up. Even Jesus was baptized. When you read Matthew, the 3rd chapter, and you'll find that he went into the water, he came up out of the water. The eunuch, and I know some scholars have questioned uh, parts of the 8th chapter of the book of Acts, but it's recorded, and we believe that it's very accurate that individuals need to go down in the water, come up out of the water. Uh, Even John 3, where the Bible talks about uh, baptizing near Aenon, uh, in Aenon near the Salem, because there was much water there. So water is in the plan. How much water is in the plan? Enough water for someone to be submerged, immersed, to be fully covered by water. I think we need to still talk to individuals about baptism. I think we need to still talk to people about the mode or the method of baptism, because if we're going to be biblical, if we're going to try to point folk to Christ through Scripture, then we must allow Scripture to speak to us. I know in some faiths, babies are Christian, and then at a certain age, when the child grows, they are confirmed. Well, let's stick with Scripture. What is the purpose of baptism? Baptism is for the remission of sin. We're not talking about inheriting the sin of Adam, the original sin. Yes, we are born into a world of sin, but sin is an act that is committed. Sin is a disposition, a lifestyle. And when a person is baptized, he's baptized for the remission or the forgiveness of past sins. And when we look at Scripture, the imagery, the metaphors, all point toward individuals being submerged, immersed, fully covered in water, and that was baptism. Even when Paul reminds the Romans of their baptism in Romans chapter 6, he lets them know that it was a burial, and they rose to walk in the newness of life. So I remember those days of reading from manuals and disciplines and catechisms, trying to help individuals understand the truth. And so we say today that baptism is a burial. Baptism is in water. So yes, we're talking about water baptism. We're talking about being fully covered. We're talking about being dipped, to plunge, to immerse in water. And that's Bible baptism. So I thought I would just share that with you today. And again, to the older preachers that preceded my generation, we're thankful. We stand on their shoulders. They were defenders of the faith. They believed in one Lord, one faith, and one baptism. They have passed the baton, and the baton is still being passed. And we're praying that we're still preaching that old time gospel, the one Lord, the one faith, the one baptism. And we're letting folk know that baptism is absolutely necessary. Now, I could go a little further. We're not saying that the water saves. No, no, that's not what we're saying, that the water saves. But I think it is important that we go about it the way that Scripture allows us to. So, no, excuse me, no, individuals did not have a choice. They did not have a choice of to be sprinkled, to be poured, or to be immersed. In New Testament times, baptism was immersion in water. Well, thank you for watching on this Friday. And Until next time, may the Lord bless you, and may he bless you real good.